Well, thank you so much, Mr. Washburne, for being with us here. Actually, this is the first time you and I have had an opportunity to meet, but I'm very familiar with the work that I did as chairman of the Foreign Operations Subcommittee of Appropriations on OPIC and the great work that it does. So we're really delighted to have you here with us today. Ray Washburne is the president of OPIC and was appointed by President Trump. He comes from a background of business and investment in Dallas with a number of investments in the restaurant business and shopping centers and a lot of other kinds of investments like that. He's very active in the community and was, I should say, and probably still remains very active in the community in Dallas with a number of boards and he serves on. I know a little bit about serving on those boards that take a lot of your time, but are really worthwhile for the community. And we're just delighted to have you with us here today to share your thoughts about OPIC. And I thought maybe just as an opening question, I'd ask you about the legislation that you've been promoting on Capitol Hill, and I think you just testified on that just the other day. Is that right?
Yeah, I did last Wednesday. I had testified from 10 to 12, and then went out and got on an airplane, went to Lima, Peru for the Summit of the Americas. So it was a busy day.
It's called the legislation. I'm very busy day, busy week for you, I should say. Is better utilization of investment leading to development. The BUILD Act, and you might just tell us a little bit about that and how you think that is, and what are the prospects of Congress acting?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here today. Is when I was appointed by the president a year ago, February, thank you. The OPIC had been zeroed out, and so when I was going through my confirmation hearing, the question kept coming out: why are you going to take over running an agency that's zeroed on the budget? And we had a bigger plan for it than I think the press was giving us credit for. But OPIC was looked at by this administration as being a national security tool for our national security belt, as well as something that foreign policy really needs to grab onto. When it was started in 1971, it was really recreating the Marshall Plan. And when we were pulling out Southeast Asia, they needed a way to do investments in countries that U.S. companies were hesitant to go back into. And so since that time, it's built up. We've made a profit for 40 years in a row. When I went up to Capitol Hill, I was like, last year we made $260 million in profit. And so, and the big but was it needs to be modernized. And that's what the BUILD Act is all about. Basically, OPIC historically could do three things. We provide political risk insurance. What that means is we can do coverage for companies to be expropriated or contract terms changed and things like that. Second was we could do structured deals. We could loan up to 75% of the debt of a particular project. And third, we could put 25% of the amount into a private equity fund that would specialize in kind of sector-focused investments like agriculture and sub-Saharan Africa, things like that. But what we missed and where we couldn't participate in the world economy was we had no right to put any equity in the projects. And so other countries' DFIs didn't want to participate with us, and we were continually cut out of projects because there wasn't the right to put in both debt and equity in the projects. And the last was we didn't have the right to do feasibility studies. So, for example, when I was down in Lima, we kept hearing that the Caribbean, all the ports in places like Honduras and Guatemala are all undersized for today's economy. We kept hearing that, but we don't have any way of knowing if that's actually true or not. But we also didn't have currently have the ability to fund a feasibility study to see if that would be an appropriate place for us to spend some money. So this new bill will give us those two new things to do. So it's very important, as well as we're taking a portion out of USAID that'll open up a lot more markets for us. And so the whole agency will be renamed. OPIC goes away, so I no longer have to explain we're not OPEC, which I run into everywhere I go. And it'll be the United States, Trade and Development Agency. So,
you just mentioned something that I thought I should follow up on.
Sure.
You said you'll take a piece out of USAID.
Yes, we're lifting out. Well, they have a development part of USAID, and that's really not their focus. And And it's small. It's only about 30 people and a small amount of money, but it's something that we'll manage. We'll use their offices in other countries, which is a great tool for us because it enables USAID agents around the world to now have 6 or 7 products to sell rather than just one.
How does this all fit into the broader foreign policy objectives of the United States?
Well, the United States, each administration determines what OPIC's mission is, and this administration has asked us to focus a lot of our attention on the Western Hemisphere, which hadn't been focused on in a long, long time, like the Northern Triangle, Central America, the Caribbean islands, Colombia, Peru, and those areas. So we're spending a lot of time looking at these countries. As everyone here knows, China is spreading their tentacles throughout the world, and so they've got a couple $1 trillion in their fund. We're very small. We're currently $28 billion in size. With this new legislation, we'll have $60 billion in size. So even though it doubles our size compared to other countries, Japan's $168 billion. We're still very, very small, but as we found, everyone looks for America to lead, and we've got to be able to lead through modernization of our techniques and having the money.
What kind of response are you hearing on Capitol Hill to?
It's been very positive. My hearing was very positive on both sides. Both the Democrats and Republicans like the mission and like what we're doing.
How do you tell legislators or other policymakers how they should explain to the American people that this kind of involvement and engagement with the world is important, and to explain to them, how do you explain the benefits of this? I mean, I always dealt with that when I was a member of Congress, as people would say, we don't like that foreign assistance stuff there.
Right.
How do you explain to them that?
Well, we're not foreign assistance in the sense
I understand.
that we're not aid.
Right.
And first thing I tell them is we made $268 million last year.
People
and we're
like
profit making. They like that, but what we explain to hesitant people, there are 2 negatives come up, is this corporate welfare, and you pick winners and losers. And first question we ask on any loan that comes to us is, why haven't you used a bank financing, just conventional financing? It's a first hurdle they have to get over. If you're in a country and you can finance a deal with, if General Electric comes to us with a deal in Mexico that they could finance at Citibank, we can't do it. If they come to us with a power plant they want to do in Afghanistan, not too many banks want to go to Afghanistan. So we go to places, we're kind of the lender of last resort. And so once we explain that, and we don't pick winners and losers, we pick anyone that can come in, our doors are open, and when we're in a country, we have 675 projects currently in 90 different countries. And so the variety of what we have, it's everything from feedlots in Ethiopia to LNG plants in Vietnam to in Peru. We're helping to fund a new port for their fishing industry. Now, why is that important to the U.S. government to be helping with those things? Well, one is it's a loan, it's not aid. 2 is it supports those local economies, and the most important thing to us, to stable governments in other countries, is employment. And in the Northern Triangle of Central America, the gang activity in the United States and all isn't really coming out of Mexico, it's coming out of Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and those countries. Why? They have a high unemployment rate. And if we can help stand up businesses in those countries that can employ people, that's to our national interest.
Good. You recently did an op-ed, I think, in The Hill, one of the newspapers up on Capitol Hill, in which you said the real emerging market isn't necessarily a country or a particular region, but it's women.
Yes.
You want to elaborate on that?
Well, if you look, women-owned businesses worldwide are the fastest growing segment of the business. And why? Well, because women haven't had an opportunity in a lot of these economies, in India and in Africa and other places. And the primary cause is they haven't had access to capital. So what OPIC has done is we've launched a women's initiative, which we call 2X, and we've put $350 million in to launch it with. That'll catalyze $1 billion of investment, and we're doing things like fintech, enabling everyone, I don't care how poor the country is or how bad the living conditions, they all have a phone. It's just amazing everywhere you go. So if we can enable fintech they can have bank accounts and minimal amount of money on their phone, they're able to have independence in that way. Second is we're trying to help with Electrify Africa, to go in and help power villagers up, to give them electricity to start businesses. And third is a water initiative we have to help bring clean water to villages. I was recently in India, and we financed the thing called water health. And what they've done is they've gone in the villages for not a lot of money. They can drill a well, provide clean water. That enables women who typically have to go from a village, walk miles down the road every day to get clean water to bring back for their families to, to cook with, to bathe with, to clean with and all. And that just takes their entire day. The freedom a woman gets by having fresh water right there in her community goes a long way to helping them gain independence. So the initiative we did in India for only $25 million loan, okay, once again it was a loan, it's going to provide water when it's fully laid out for 100 million people. So and that's not a humanitarian, I mean that's a humanitarian thing, but from a business perspective, that's good. It provides people with business, just all aspects.
Dr. Kim from the World Bank was on the stage just a few moments ago, and something you just said made me think of something he was saying about how in India were fortunate, the World Bank, to not make the mistake of investing 25 years ago in putting telephone poles everywhere in India, but they said maybe there's something to this idea of cellular phones in the future. Speaking of energy, what do you see? Do you see building power lines as the future, or is there going to be is solar or other kinds of energy, small energy, going to be the future?
Right. We have a huge portfolio of renewables worldwide, from solar and wind and all. Another big aspect is LNG. You look at the islands in the Caribbean, the cost of electricity is the highest in the world in all these Caribbean islands. It takes a huge part of their GDP just to pay for energy because they're all running on diesel fuel. But if we can put LNG into these islands, that brings their cost of their economy way down. And so that's another area we're looking that we can immediately get into these, because a lot of these countries just can't, solar just doesn't work and wind just doesn't work. I mean, economically, they just don't work, but LNG does.
Yeah, well, wind and solar, of course, you have to have storage to go with that. But
that's correct.
If it's acceptable to you, can we open this up
Absolutely.
for a few questions here? Let's take some questions. And I'll take the first hand I saw here, and we'll wait for the microphone. And please identify yourself and ask your question.
Mike Boyle, Boyle Energy, New Hampshire. Mr. Washburne, how does your organization flourish and thrive at this time under the Trump administration while the Ex-Im Bank is languishing in obscurity for the last 3 years?
Well, Ex-Im is a domestic-focused organization. We're 100% international. I can't do anything within the borders of the United States, any of our territories, Puerto Rico, and things like that. So why are we flourishing? There's such a demand worldwide for what we have, and we're really a tool of national security, and I think the people on the Hill realize that.
Other questions from the audience? Okay, we'll
covered everything.
I guess no. We'll come back to a couple of other things.
Yeah.
And I did want to ask you about you mentioned Power Africa initiative, and how is this helping to close the gap and make it possible for more American businesses to invest in? Do you see investment in Africa as something of the future, large? It's been kind of a black hole for a while.
Yeah, well, we've got, surprisingly, countries like Nigeria and different ones that you wouldn't typically think of as a place that's active, or Zimbabwe or Botswana and countries like that. There is a huge amount, but they have no power, they have no communication. So we also fund cell phone towers to help get communication out of them. Once someone can get on the internet, it totally changes the economy.
It changes everything in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely does.
Lives.
But that only works if they have electricity.
Right. That's right. They have to have some kind of electricity. I see a question over here. Yes, ma'am. Wait for the.
Lyra Hughes Hale with Hale Global Economics. My question is, how does what you're doing compare to China's Belt and Road Initiative? How does it compare in scope? What about the lending? There's concern that the Belt and Road, that the lending might be something that can't be repaid. And and the country focus, how would you compare your activities to that? How does the U.S. stack up?
Sure, great question. And Belt and Road is something that we have studied very closely. I've recently signed a MOU with both the Japanese government and a separate one with the Australian government, and we're about to do one with the government in India to co-invest together along the Belt and Road initiative. And that could be primarily ports, all types of infrastructure. The Chinese is an example of what you just asked in Sri Lanka. You probably know they've invested billions of dollars into a port. They overlent on it. Everyone knew it wasn't going to work. It didn't work. So what did they do? They foreclosed it. And now they control it for the next 99 years. But the Chinese have $2 trillion they're putting out throughout those areas. But as far as the shipping lanes go, and the India, I can speak to that because I just got back from there, is they're fearful of the Chinese controlling the Indian Ocean below their country and the shipping lanes. And so they'd like us to come and help finance the upgrade of their ports, as a specific example. But we run into the Chinese everywhere, from Mexico to Peru. I mean, it's all over. So with just a small little $60 billion agency, we have to be very strategic about what we do and try to stretch our dollars out with joint ventures with some of these other countries. And so, yes.
Let's take the woman back there and then the other person there. Right there. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Hello, thank you for your chat. I'm Courtney Vaughn, independent consultant. So my question is what relationship is there between World Bank and OPIC? For example, we know that World Bank has a major knowledge base on countries that they're supporting, and you had mentioned earlier that you didn't have the feasibility capacity per se inside OPIC, and there's a lot of knowledge in the World Bank. And I'm speaking specifically to a country like Nigeria that has a large infrastructure gap, especially in electricity. And my observation is that even with the Chinese engagement, there is a lot of money going into dinosaur technology, right? Dinosaur mechanisms, equipment, etc. And if one is looking future, and listen to what the World Bank president said earlier, where one is looking at a digitized world, and even the US seems like, we know you're not going to get off the grid tomorrow, but the bottom line is a country that has a lot of gen sets, they're already used to distributive power per se, right? How do you collaborate to at least, not just to put money in the system, but to say, can this be sustainable, if we look at it a different way with support of the World Bank, institutions like the World Bank?
Well, we work other DFIs around the world, the World Bank, the IFC, IDB, all of them, we coordinate with all the time. I mean, our staff is always talking to, but you have to look at us really as a bank. And so somewhere like Nigeria, someone has to come to us with a project. Or if the World Bank says, or if we did a feasibility study, said we need to redo the electrical grid in Nigeria, you still have to find a private developer to come along, because the maximum I can put into a project is 75%. So someone's got to come up with that 25% or larger equity slug for a project. So, but we do work with the World Bank on coming up with ideas and places where we need to go. I'm open currently in 130 countries. We're active in 90 of them with active projects. So, but again, I have a small staff. I have about 300 people, and so the incoming projects, we have to prioritize them in that way. So.
The statement you made, and then she also referred to it, that you don't do feasibility studies. Who do you rely on for your feasibility studies?
Well, the person that comes in the project. So, like, for example, when I was in Peru.
Putting up the 25% private?
No. Well, for example, we had several port deals come to us in the Caribbean. Do we really know, is there really demand? I mean, for what? I mean, it sounds right. Their little one-page brief paper sounds good, but we need the right to go in and fund feasibility studies in certain areas where there looks like there's a strategic need and find out really if there is one. For example, the Caribbean islands on LNG, we've done enough there that we know there's a big demand there. But if LNG was a new product and we didn't know what it could do, I don't have any ability to do that other than someone would bring us a project, and once they've applied, they start spending the money on a feasibility study. And a lot of companies don't want to throw money down a feasibility study until they know there's actual demand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, sir. Right there in the middle.
Thank you, Jim. William Riley, World Wildlife Fund. I have invested with OPIC money in water in developing countries. Mm-hmm. Drip irrigation in India was a very successful one. Making money from the villages, however, is hard to do, and I'd be interested in the structure of that investment. Did you do it through a private equity firm? Did you make direct equity investments yourself in village wells and things of that sort? How did it work, and what were the expectations on return?
You're talking about water health?
Water health, yes.
Okay. They came to us, and a lot of those, I don't know, remember the exact, how much debt we did put onto that off the top of my head, but there are a lot of philanthropies that now will come in and they'll do first loss money. So in that case, we had a foundation, I think it might have been the Gates Foundation, but one of the foundations came in, they put up money, they realized, let's say it was a $100 million project, and we put in 50. The other 50 might be dicey whether they're ever going to get their money back, right? Because it doesn't, but the 50 million piece would, which is the first debt. A lot of foundations will come in and put up that gap money just because they see that it's a good need to have. I don't have the specifics, but I'm happy to get you that information if you're interested in that. Yeah. And the other thing OPIC can do is our debt financing is at basically 10-year treasury, so it's not expensive. And a lot of these developing countries, you can only get 1 to 3 year debt because banks are scared of them and everybody. OPIC can give 20 and 30-year notes. And so in a water project that might take 5 to 10 years to develop out anyway, you got to have the opportunity to have long-term debt. And that's, when people say about corporate welfare, we're going to places you just can't get debt financing at all.
Yes, sir. And then I'll take one over here.
Thank you very much. First of all, my congratulations on having such a dynamic focus on international investing and promotion of American investment abroad, because when one looks at the policy formulations coming from Washington, normally one doesn't expect that. So I'm delighted to hear that the agency is doing such a great job. My question to you is, how does the selection of criteria, selection of projects reflect the views of U.S. government with respect to the countries involved? Do you have any country selection criteria like MCC does, for example, or do you just take any project that comes along where there's a U.S. interest?
Good question. We look at everything. So in those countries I said we're open, anyone wants to call, we're happy to look at it. As far as taking our team, and we're basically focused, drill down focus on 3 main areas right now. One is the Northern Triangle, other is the Belt and Road Initiative, and the other is Middle East. And so Afghanistan, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, some of those, trying to lean up some projects there. Africa we're still very active in. South America we're very, very active in. So we're not self-selected from that standpoint, but we just have so much manpower to go around and focus in on certain countries. We're closed in high-income countries. Another thing is we have a $15,000 GDP cap. So Peru, for example, is about $12,000 GDP. The Ukraine is $2,500 GDP. It's almost lower than every country in Africa.
Great.
Yeah, I think they have a big black market, but that's what they tell us. So but it's about 2,500. So a lot of these countries, so we're closed obviously in high-income European countries and others, but we're open. Every country in Africa, we're open in every country in South America, but Bolivia and Venezuela and Cuba. And I'll just throw in North Korea, Russia, and China. So other than that, we're open everywhere. So
There was a question over here. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Gary Kleiman. I'm an emerging financial markets expert. We've been talking about the unified DFI for a lot of years, and it looks like it's close to fruition. And with OPIC, always the reservation had been whether you would have the power to take equity stakes, and it seems like you'll be able to do that. And I wonder, just in terms of the comparative advantage and capacity you see going forward, I mean, you see that making a huge difference, or other elements like the MCC, which was just mentioned, is now allowed to do regional compacts. I mean, what do you see sort of being your major drivers, let's say in the near term, with this new power?
well, first we got to get it voted on and passed. So, but once we get that, a little thing on the legislation, I've done my House, and I'll be going up in front of the Senate Foreign Relations sometime in May, and then our goal is to have it voted on by, well, I shouldn't say that because the Senate determines all goals, but we'd like to get it done by the summer recess. And if we're not able to do that, it might be year end. But the two sponsors of the bill, on the House side, Royce, and on the Senate side, which is Corker and Coons, Corker's leaving and Royce is leaving. And to both of them, this has been a big legacy item. It's been working, as many of you in this room know, for years and years and years. We finally have got to the point that we think we can get it over the goal line, that legislation's been introduced. The White House supports it. At my hearing the other day, I had both the White House send a letter of support, as well as Elizabeth Littlefield, who was my predecessor under the Obama administration. We got incredible bipartisan support. If it's ever going to happen, this is the year we think it's going to happen, especially with two sponsors leaving, January 1st, getting it
Well,
pushed through.
that does give them an incentive to try
Yeah,
to get
it gives
it
them
done,
great incentive. And to them, it's a great achievement and win to have going out. As far as what it does for us on the equity side is we get cut out of an incredible amount of deals because the other countries don't want us in. And the reason is we've always taken senior debt. So if we go on a project, other countries are always, unless they go in on our debt stack where we can go pari passu with them the debt, if they ever put equity in, they're always behind the U.S. And in 2008, 2009, when all the markets melted down, a lot of those countries got totally wiped out in their investments in steel. OPIC did just fine. But countries are now saying, we don't want you involved because we don't want you to have a senior position to us. So we've got to have that. Now, that doesn't mean our debt can still be senior. We got to have some equity at risk on the risk side so they know in their minds we have skin in the game.
We have time for at least one more question here. I'll take this hand right there.
Bill Salter from Citigroup. You mentioned that you have a small budget compared to, or fund compared to China, et cetera. What would be your ideal budget?
My ideal size, well, I don't know. Sometimes having just a ton of money has you do dumb things. I think the Chinese are throwing money away on a lot of projects. They're way over financing them. They're doing things that shouldn't be done to begin with, trying to buy influence.
Are they succeeding in buying influence?
The Chinese?
Yeah.
I think so. I think so. A lot of these countries. I mean, every country I go to, they have a brand new soccer stadium,
Right.
courtesy of the Chinese. I mean, it's amazing. The airport, I was in Zambia. You land at the airport, being built by a Chinese construction company. Get in the bus, first thing you see coming out of the airport, soccer stadium given by the Chinese. They're buying all the rare earths and minerals in these countries. So I don't think you could ever have enough money. You could have trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. We're just trying to do what we have, and I think $60 billion, ideally probably be closer to 100, but, currently we only have 22 billion deployed. I've got 7 billion more to, OPIC typically has done 3.5 to 4 billion a year. This equity authority is going to give us the ability to do a lot more real quick, but it's still going to take several years to even get up to our cap, doing the right projects. And doing the right projects is having developers coming in, sponsors, and continuing to put in a substantial amount of equity with us. Because by doing that, the failure rate since 1971 at OPIC is 1%. And the reason is there's so much equity in these deals, and we can give long loan terms. Things typically work their way out, even if you go through a recession, because the loan terms aren't this 3-year bullet that a lot of people have been facing.
Well, that leads me to the final question, because I know you've got a hard stop here, but at the outset you mentioned the 3 things that OPIC did traditionally. Are you still doing political risk management?
Yeah, I tell you what's interesting on the political risk insurance. As I said earlier on the structured side, if a bank can do the deal, that's the first question we have to ask. Political risk insurance, OPIC used to do about $9 billion. We're about $3.5 billion today. The reason is the private market has woken up to you can make money in the political risk insurance world. That's good. That has reduced our book by 2/3, and I'd rather it be zero. I'd rather OPIC not even exist, but that's not the reality of the world we live in. And so it's shrunk just because the private market has come in. And so on that political risk, that's another question we ask. Will the private market provide that insurance first?
As I recall from my time in Congress, that was a moneymaker for OPIC.
It still is.
Still is.
Yeah, it still is very much a moneymaker, but I'm glad private industry has
Is
started
taking it over.
because they, in fact, there's our biggest competitor are former OPIC employees that went out and started a competing political risk insurance company, which is great. Because again, we want private enterprise to do it, not government, but we kind of fit that gap where private business won't go.
Well, President Washburne, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us here today, and I think you've given us some really good insights into the direction of OPIC, and we're very pleased to have you with us.
And if we get this additional funding, we're looking for deals. So you guys bring us some projects. So,
Thank you very
all
much
right.
for being with us.